Yo, what up, everybody? My name is TricksterShadow. If you don't know me, I'm a variety killer main with over 8,000 hours in DBD. Been playing DBD since 2016 when it first came out with all the infinites and all that fun jazz. And to be honest with you, I never thought that DBD would ever get MMR, and I thought the MMR testing was going to result in nothing. But we are where we are. It looks like MMR is here to stay. And I thought I would make a video, since everybody's made tier lists in the past, I thought I would make a video about the tier list of where I think killers are placed in high MMR. Because high MMR DBD, I feel like, is a different, whole different game than Dead by Daylight in general. It's even different than like competitive DBD. I actually feel like high MMR is harder than competitive DBD because at least in competitive DBD, there's restrictions. There's like certain amount of perks that you can run. You can't like stack so many perks, or you can't stack like really strong items or really strong add-ons for killer. And so I feel like it's actually a little bit harder because when you stack those really strong things, it makes it to where the skill level of matches is heavily reduced, and it's a lot more dependent on like what you bring. And so all of these killers are assuming that they're running like some of their better add-ons or some of their best add-ons, and they're running like really strong builds, like the 3 or 4 slowdowns, of course. And so that's how I'll be rating these. Mainly the differentiating factor between the killers in this tier list is how good their power is and how good their power is consistently. Now I'm going to be assuming that the person that is playing each of these killers is like really good with each of the killers and playing them at a high level. And so that's what we're going to be going forward with. And I'll explain while I place killers up on the tier list, why I'm placing them there. But just so you guys know, that's the reason why I'm placing them where I'm placing them. And you don't have to agree. If you don't agree with me, then just say in the comments down below, because I'm sure that some of my placements will be a bit controversial, just because my opinions have really changed in the past couple weeks, especially with MMR being out. I tried out different killers because all of my killers were hard stuck at high MMR, and I noticed that some killers I was having better time with than others. And so we're going to go forward, and the first, of course, in S tier. S tier is going to be the killers that will be able to perform well against a vast majority of teams. That no matter what the people are bringing, you'll be able to hold your own very well, or at least decently well against them. It's going to be really hard if you're a decent killer, good enough a killer, for teams to overcome you unless they're running the absolute best, unless they're running like all engineered toolboxes with max charges, with streetwise, prove thyself, all that. Unless they're doing that, but even then, you have a very good chance of beating them. So the first killer, very predictably, of course, it's been the first killer in every tier list for years, I think Nurse. Now, Nurse is very good because she ignores pretty much everything in the game. Windows don't really hinder her, pallets don't hinder her. Really, the only things that hinder Nurse are line of sight and distance. Those are the 2 things that hinder her. And you'll notice that people that are playing against Nurse that are decent at the game, good survivors, they will try to break line of sight, and when they break line of sight, they'll try to use that line of sight breakage to try to gain as much distance away from the Nurse as possible. Because if the Nurse doesn't know where you are, they have to guess either you're running straight or you're looping around loop, and if they guess wrong, then that's a big hindrance to them, and they have to recover. But that hindrance is really like mitigated if the Nurse is running recharge add-ons. If the Nurse is running double recharge each time she misses, while it still hurts, it's not nearly as bad. And even if she's just running like 1 recharge, if she's running a recharge plus a distancing blink, for extra blink distance, of course, then it really doesn't mean much if she misses at all. But the reason why I'm putting her here, obviously, like I said, she doesn't really care about anything. Throwing a palace early doesn't really matter for her. And on a lot of maps, she's very, very good. Really, the main map that I've seen nurses struggle with, and I've struggled with, is Mother's Dwelling. And Mother's Dwelling, really, for the same reason it struggles for everybody else. It's just so big that even with her very good mobility of being able to go through objects and be able to cover large distances with her blinks, still, if somebody is running forward and they just continually run forward, then it can be a bit of a pain in order to catch up people. But if you manage to down somebody and you put them like the corner of the map and then just kind of like ladder your way, if you don't know what I mean by ladder, I can quickly draw it out. If you kind of like ladder or like proxy a little bit, as boring as I know that is, so essentially like if you have somebody in the corner and like see like there's like somebody in the corner of the map, and then you just kind of like zigzag your way away from the hook, and then when you see somebody, you push them away, and then you keep on looking over to the other direction. You see somebody else, you go back over here, push them away, and just keep on working your way back. And that is a very good way to like force altruism. It's what a lot of good killers do. It's very annoying to go against, and the survivors are not going to be very happy with you. But if you're on a really big map, that's the best way to like mitigate the map size and try to like punish people. Because the best way that you can try to get the balance in your favor, if you're on a big map, is to try to force people to get closer to you. And so I think Nurse is very, very good at getting those hits, very good at ignoring really everything. That's why I'm placing her where she is. Now, the second killer, very close, the second and third, is Blight. I think that Blight with Alchemist Ring and Speed can be very comparable to Nurse. However, he's more map dependent than Nurse. Nurse is kind of map dependent, not really. But there's some maps that she struggles with. Especially if you're a bit newer to her. But again, we're assuming that you're really, really good with the killer. Blight with Alchemist Ring and Speed, he's just a powerhouse. He's a bit stronger than Nurse, I think, at some moments with those add-ons and on some maps. And really the main reason is because he can close the gap very quickly. He can get multiple hits on multiple teammates very quickly because he can move so fast. And he can be across the map. He can be on one side of the map way over here, and then somebody's hooked way over here, and he can close the gap and go back to the hook within seconds. And there's very few killers that can do that, especially as effectively as he can, especially with maneuvering around objects. Because even a killer like Hillbilly, if there's a bunch of like stuff in the way, then the killer has to try to maneuver all the way around, and sometimes they're not able to do that. With Blight, he can ping pong from rock to rock, and he can get there pretty easily. So yeah, I think that Blight, because of how much mobility he has, and because he can spread pressure so easily, it makes it to where perks like Tinker, of course, Pop Goes the Weasel, Ruin, any information perks, Barbecue, Surveillance, all those perks are super deadly in his hands, and he can utilize them very well, and he can put out a lot of pressure, more so than most killers in the game. And the only reason I put him a little bit less than Nurse is just because he still has to obey pallets of windows, and he still has to like deal with like walls and everything. But I think he can be as powerful as Nurse with the right add-ons and the right build. Now, the third most powerful, again, probably pretty predictably, is Spirit. Spirit is very good, and she actually has a very decent map mobility power. The map mobility is better when she has add-ons. If she has a speed or a duration add-on or both, then she can just cross the entire map in a single power use. And that makes it to where, again, perks like Ruin, Pop, Tinker, Surveillance, Barbecue, really anything that is either gen oppressive or that is information, she can heavily capitalize on. And in addition to that, she's kind of like Nurse in a way to where she just really doesn't care about loops. If you're a good Spirit, you can use, especially with speed and duration, you can use that power to just go around pallets, even if somebody throws it down early, and you can get the hits off if your ears are attuned to following the survivor's movements. And so because of her being able to counter survivor's looping very well and being able to use perks super effectively, more so than most killers, putting her in S tier as well. These are the three killers that I feel like can do well against the majority of teams and do better than most of the other cast. I feel like these killers are the best of the best. Now, those are the only three killers that I'm putting in S tier. In terms of A tier is killers that are pretty strong, but they can still suffer a lot more than the killers in S tier if they're going against really good people. And so the killers that I would put here, the first, I would say, firstly, is Hag. Now, a lot of people underrate Hag. I don't know why people underrate Hag as much as they do. I see a lot of people say that like Hag isn't that good. She's a bit overrated, and I really never understand it. I think I guess I kind of do understand it. I think the main reason why people don't like Hag or they underrate her is because they don't really go against her that much, or if they do like go against her, it's usually a baby Hag, or it's a Hag that's like super experienced and they just like write her off like, oh, she's just plain mean. But like Hag's playstyle is just kind of mean. It's just how it is. She like not very many people like camping, and she is the camping queen. She's been the camping queen forever. And Hag is very weak. Very weak at the beginning of the game, because she has to set her power, of course. But as soon as she sets up her web And as soon as she pushes the survivor into that web and gets them down, she can be very deadly. And the reason for that is because if she can get it down before, I would say, 2 gens pop, then she can make it to where at least somebody dies before they finish off the gens, if not 2 people. And if the survivors are actually trying to be altruistic, then she can get everybody dead, because she punishes altruism very, very heavily. To where if she gets somebody, and again, basements and corners, strongest hooks in the game, if she gets somebody like in the corner of the map, if she gets them on a hook and she sets her web all around that hook, no matter where somebody approaches, they're going to run into a trap. Then she's going to be able to spread out the damage, especially if she has Sloppy Butcher. She can make it to where it's really big pain healing. Force Penance is really good with her, where if somebody actually manages to get close to the save and they activate a trap, then she can hit them with Force Penance. They can't heal for 80 seconds. She can really slow down the game as soon as she gets that first hook. As soon as she gets that first hook, that is the deciding factor of how the rest of the game is going to go. Like, really nothing else matters for Hag besides how that first hook goes. That is the most crucial point in the game. And if she can manage to effectively trap around her first hook and effectively deny the saves, then she can get so many hook stages. She can make people tick into second state because of how much she can pressure around the hook. And because of how much control she has over hook states and how much control she can have over certain like quadrants of the map, I would say that she's one of the most effective killers in terms of being in like the 8s here. Now, of course, she can be very countered by flashlights. Flashlights can really do a lot to her, but of course, you can run Franklins to counter that, especially the new Franklins that use charges. It's very good for getting rid of a lot of flashlight charges. You just hit them once and then trap the flashlight, and they got to crawl away back. And by the time they get back to it, there's only like 25% of the flashlight left. And then besides that, when she's carrying somebody, they can activate the traps and make it to where her traps aren't as effective because she has to replace them. And then besides that, they can activate traps when she's far away. But usually if you're playing Hag, you don't really want to go away from where your web is. And if you do go away from where your web is, you need to identify like, okay, this is like as far as I can go. This is like the border. Otherwise, my traps are going to not be able to be activatable. I'm not going to be able to teleport back. So you kind of got to set a boundary for yourself, like how far you can go. But because of how well she can lock down an area and how well she can punish saves, she can confirm hook states. She can get kills very, very well. Now, really the only thing that's bad about her is mobility, but really it's more of like, she doesn't really need to have mobility. Lock down the 3-gen, lock down the hook, and you're just doing very, very well. Now, the next killer that I have. The next killer I feel like is a bit of a controversial pick for being the next up in A tier, but I feel like makes a lot of sense. At least it does to me. The next killer I'd put in A tier is Wraith. And now, I know a lot of people, there's still like the common idea that Wraith is super weak, that he has to M1 people, and so he's not very good. Wraith is crazy, in my opinion. Wraith has some of the best mobility in the game. He goes like, and again, like I don't know the numbers, but it seems like he goes like as fast as like Blight does, except just with the spell, especially with speed add-ons. And then he has other add-ons that make him so much more effective in chase. If you're running into a lot of matches where people are throwing down pallets immediately, run Shadow Dance Serpent, and you can break pallets at like Mach 5 speed and be able to uncloak automatically and hit them after they throw it down, making it to where pre-dropping pallets is a really bad thing for them to do. You can run more speed add-ons, so you can cover the map faster, so you can get more use out of your slowdown perks or information perks. You can run the Mangled add-on to where you have another healing slow to where they can't heal up as well. And because of Wraith's hit and run nature, being able to traverse the map very quickly, be able to sneak up on people and get that first hit, you make it to where he's even more effective at getting that first hit, because eventually people are not going to be able to heal as fast as you're hitting people. You're going to be able to get downs. His add-ons and his base power are super kitted to make him effective against the majority of teams. If you're running into a certain situation to where you notice yourself lacking something, his add-ons can supplement whatever you're lacking. And then beyond that, when you run slowdown or information perks on Wraith, he can capitalize on that just as well as like Blight, Spirit, and Nurse. But the only thing that really like hinders him is, of course, the pallets. He really doesn't have much in terms of pallet play. He does, depending on the tile, he does have his uncloak speed to where he can get a hit or make it very dangerous for the survivor. But if it's at a regular jungle gym, he won't be able to utilize that very well. It's really only on like the 50-50 pallets or like the 60-40 pallets, pallets that are a little bit more unsafe than the pallet gyms. Then those ones he's really good at if he can manage to get the uncloak. But even then, they can just run away or reposition in order to reduce his effectiveness. And so because his power and chase isn't as good as the ones in S tier, put him down in A tier. But I think he's very effective. He can do very well against a lot of teams, especially with a really decent add-ons and a really good build. Very, very strong killer. Now, the next killer I'm going to put, the killer that's been in high tier lists for a while, Billy. Now, Billy is very strong. He can, of course, traverse the map very quickly. He can capitalize, again, these are all killers that can capitalize on information and gen oppression perks very, very well, more so than other killers. Can't talk. But the main drawback of Billy's, or drawbacks, of course, is overheat mechanic. You really need to keep in mind of his overheat. That can rob you of a lot of instances of getting a hit. Not even if you've overheated, but sometimes, especially if you're running an engraving add-on, sometimes you're at like 90% of your overheat meter, and you know that you can't get a chainsaw, and so you got to wait a little bit in order to get your chainsaw, and that can sometimes be enough distance for somebody to get to a vault, or force you to M1 instead of getting a chainsaw because you're too overheated. And so that can really be a hindrance. In addition, that if survivors pre-drop pallets a lot, they can, of course, they'll chew through pallets because of your chainsaw, but that can eat up so much time to where you can't be nearly as effective. His power is not as easy to maneuver as Blights or Nurses or Spirit in terms of maneuvering around objects, or even Wraith. Wraith can just zoom across the map, and he doesn't have any hindrances like bumping into objects. And so because of the limitations of his movement and the limitations of his power, being able to just throw down pallets early, as well as like if you're curving with Billy, there's still a decent amount of counterplay with curving, to where like Billy's curving isn't 100% that it's going to hit. It's really dependent on how the survivor moves, and survivors can very easily dodge a lot of his hits. And so because of how counterable his power is, he's still very strong, but because of how counterable his power is, and because of the restrictions in his mobility, I'm putting him, and his placement is A tier. But I still feel like he's very effective. It's just, if you're going against people that are pre-throwing a lot of pallets, you got to be running that low pro chain so you can break the pallet immediately and then rush through and get that hit at the very least. I feel like that is kind of a staple in Billy's builds if you're playing at high MMR. Now, the last killer that I have for high MMR is actually going to be the Demogorgon killer. It's going away pretty soon. And now, the reason why I put Demo a high, or a low A tier, is because, one, he also has mobility. His portals aren't nearly as good as other killers' mobility, but the portals still do provide a bit of mobility and a bit of tracking. With his better add-ons, of course, his add-ons for the shred make him a lot more powerful, but also there's an aura reading add-on. I think it's the Lycan, I could be wrong, that shows you where everybody's auras are when you come out of your portal and when you're going through your portal. It's best tracking in the game. Like, it's better than any other tracking perk. You set down 2 portals at the beginning, go from one to the other, bam, you have free lethal pursuer in like under 10 seconds. It's actually very underrated. I don't see enough people to use it for how powerful it is. So he has quite a few add-ons that are very, very good, that are very, very effective. And that can be just like basically free perks. Like, he has free lethal pursuer in terms of an add-on. He has, or to say free perks. Yeah. He has free lethal pursuer in terms of an add-on. He has free say the best blast in terms of an add-on. He has free brutal strengths in terms of an add-on. And so depending on what add-ons you use, you can just have kind of like 6 or 7, or you can have 6. You can't run through add-ons. You can have 6 different perks, with 2 of them being in the form of add-ons. And so because of how kitted out his add-ons can be, it makes him very effective in either controlling like where people are and like knowing where people are, or being very oppressive in chase. And so because of how oppressive he can be in chase, being able to leap forward and get those hits, being able to shred through those pallets, get through pallets very quickly, he can do pretty decently in chases, as well as being able to teleport and oppress the gens decently well. And so because of that, I'm putting at the bottom of A tier. He does struggle a little bit if people pre-throw, but again, if they pre-throw, he can just break the pallet really fast, similar to Billy. But he doesn't have an overheat mechanic, at least not yet. And so I feel like his placement is pretty justified. I feel like a good demo player can be one of the more oppressive killers in the game and can make really any loop borderline unloopable. And then if you do choose to not loop it and just throw it on pallets, he just breaks the pallet super fast, especially with the add-on that makes the pallet break speed a little bit faster with the leap ability. So I feel like he's a very strong killer. Now, going on the B tier. B tier killers, I feel like, are very, very hit or miss. Very hit or miss. They're decently strong, and I think with the right builds, they can be pretty decent. But against good people, they can probably not perform as well. At least not be as consistent. And so the first killer that I'm going to put in the top of B tier is going to be Freddy. Freddy has received some nerfs. He's received a lot of nerfs to his add-ons in particular, and even his base ability has been nerfed. But I think I think his base ability is still really good. I think it'll still be very effective against people that are looping. But the main thing that I think is good for Freddy is his ability to teleport. His ability to teleport makes him better at traversing the map than any other killer, because the bigger the map is, the more benefits to him, because he can traverse a map like Mother's Dwelling in a matter of seconds and get to the far corner of the map and be able to pressure a gen faster than any other killer. No other killer can cross an entire map as fast as he can. And so because of that mobility, it makes it to where perks like Ruin, Tinker are very strong on him, makes it Repop is very strong with them, and he can get some decent slowdown builds to where it can make the match last forever. And if the match lasts forever, if the match is lasting like above like 10, 15 minutes, it'll make it to where no matter if people are throwing in pallets immediately, the resources all just start dwindling, and it makes it to where people just start getting hit because they have nothing else to throw. And so I feel like he can just win through attrition. He can, because of his teleport ability and because of his anti-loop as well, but of course people can just throw in pals immediately, because of the way his power is set up and because of how well he can utilize perks to aid his power, he can just win through attrition, be able to dwindle down the resources, and be able to make the match timer or match go so long that he's just eventually going to get kills. And because of that, I feel like he's a bit higher in the B tier. Because of the mobility, because of the way his power works, decently effective. However, the main thing that makes him kind of bad, of course, in addition to people just throwing in pallets immediately and negating his anti-loop ability, because if you don't loop, there's nothing for him to negate. If somebody runs early when you're teleporting to a generator, then that makes to where unless you have Ruin or even Pop a little bit, but Pop, you still got to kick the generator. Unless you have those perks, then it really makes it to where like the chase doesn't really. You get close enough, but depending on how the map is set up, it can really screw you over. People running early from the generator, and of course you can use that to your advantage. You can approach a generator and then act like you're teleporting, but then not teleport and hope they run into you. But because of people running early and because of people separating, stuff like that, you might have multiple people on generators and you can't pressure them all at once. And his power goes on cooldown whenever he teleports. He's not as effective as the killers in A tier, but he's still pretty strong. All right, the next killer that I have up, I would say the Leatherface. Leatherface is the next up in terms of strength. Now, the reason why I put Leatherface here is because Leatherface, of course, is an insta-down killer, much like how Billy is. He can down people with his chainsaw very well, but of course he's different than Billy in that his chainsaw isn't meant for mobility. It's not meant for only singular targets. He can down multiple people with it, and it's meant to be kind of like a medium to close range chainsaw. Now, he's very good at camping, which makes him pretty decent in terms of like going against good groups, because if he gets somebody on hook, there's really no way they're going to be able to save without trading. And even if they trade, he can still run them down, especially with good add-ons, and possibly get the person even through borrowed time. But one of the big strengths of Bubba, I feel, with Leatherface, is that he can shoot through pallets better than most killers. To where if somebody is approaching a pallet, you pull up your chainsaw. If they run through it, then you start your chainsaw sweep and you start running through the pallet. And if you're running a chili add-ons, then you can catch up to them before they can complete an entire loop. And if they throw it down immediately, they don't run through it, then you just break it immediately, and they really gain no distance on it because of how short the cooldown is after you break something. And so because of that, he can clear the map of pallets very, very quickly. And if you stack some slowdown perks on with them, he really doesn't benefit as well from information perks. If you stack some slowdown perks with them, he can deplete the map of a ton of resources and still be very, very lethal. But the main problem is he doesn't have the mobility. If everybody separates, then there's really nothing for him to close the gap as quickly as he would hope. And so, because of that lack of mobility, even though he's a bit more lethal than like Freddy and Chase, because of the lack of mobility, it makes it to where people can just separate, and that makes him a little bit worse than Freddy in some ways. But I feel like Freddy just has that mobility. The mobility is key. Being able to save time is key, just by being able to traverse the map. But he's very, very strong. Really, yeah, really just running like gen oppression perks. Also, Tinker, of course, is very good with them. Trail Torment. Really anything that suppresses his Terrius so he can get those cheeky downs with the chainsaw coming around the corner. Very, very good. But of course, whether Tinker has purpose in like high MMR, but Trail Torment maybe not. He can be very, very good. Very effective killer. In fact, I think you can make an argument that he may be a little bit more powerful than Freddy just because of his lethality and chase. But I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now, the next killer that I have is very like hit or miss, but I feel like is a very effective killer, is Oni. Now, Oni is very dependent on getting that first hit. There are some things that you can do to ensure the first hit. Lethal Pursuer is very good for identifying where people are very early, or you can use Whispers if you prefer Whispers. What I always use on Oni, especially if I know I'm going against really good people, is Coup de Grace. Coup de Grace is very essential, especially if you think you're going against good people, because that extra lunge distance whenever a generator completes is very good at getting somebody to start bleeding, because all you need is that first hit. As soon as you get that first hit, you can get blood and you can start chaining together downs. Now, people will separate when they're going against an Oni, but if you're running duration and speed add-ons, then those separation doesn't really matter nearly as much. And so, because of his potential to snowball and because of his potential to down multiple people in his power and be able to get a lot of pressure, he's pretty decent. But he needs those hits. He needs those hits, and he needs decent add-ons in order to counter people separating, because if people separate against Oni, it really reduces his power effectiveness. And because of being able to reduce his power effectiveness as much as they can, because his power runs out after a while, and because he needs those hits, especially against like people at third and palace early, it's kind of hard to get those hits unless you're running like Coup de Grace. Even then, it's a bit hard. He is where he is in the beats here. But because he still has that potential, I'm putting him where he is. Otherwise, if he didn't have nearly as much potential as he does, because Oni can get everybody on the floor in a single blood rush if he, or demon rush, that's what it's called. He can get everybody on the floor in a single demon rush if he does his power effectively, but because it's kind of hit or miss, I'm putting him where he is. Bit of you're gonna have inconsistent games. You're gonna have inconsistent games with all the killers and beats here, but that's just how it is. The next one I'm going to put up here is Pyramid Head. Now, putting Pyramid Head up here because power is decent in chase. It can really punish people, especially if they try to throw in pallets early, because they get locked in animation. You can hit them. And if you get good with hitting his power, you can make it where most tiles are pretty deadly with him. He can be very, very decent. But also, he's really good because he can tunnel people out of the game. He completely ignores Decisive Strike. He can negate Borrowed Time through his cages. He can negate a lot of stuff through his cages. He can negate Will Make It. And so because of that, and because the spawns are pretty predictable, when you send somebody to a cage, you can pretty much predict where they're going to be, because it's going to be across the map from you. So you just run across the map, and no, there's the person in the cage. And so you can just tunnel them out of the game very quickly, and you can get people out very, very quickly, and it can change the entire match. I've gone against Pyramid Heads before to where they're just not doing well, and they just tunnel people out of the game because they know where the cage spawns are. And there's really not much you can do about it, especially if they're good at their power. And so because of how well he can get people out of the game very, very quickly, I think he has a place in B tier. Of course, if he misses his power, if he doesn't manage to get somebody to step in his goop to where they can be caged, then his power is not nearly as effective. And because of that, he's in the lower end of the B tier and can have a bit more inconsistent games, but still very powerful. Now, to round off the B tier, this is another killer that I feel like a lot of people sleep on, that people don't think is nearly as effective as I think that she is Plague. This is the last killer I'm going to put in the B tier. Now, Plague is, I think, a decent killer. It's just a lot of people play her wrong. Plague, since she can reduce people's health states by 1, make them permanently injured with her puke, it's very good, shortens chases, but of course people can cleanse. Now, if people cleanse, then she gets essentially her flamethrower ability, and her flamethrower ability is one of the best abilities of the game, being able to have a red puke. And because of that, because of like how well she can contest hooks, because you really can't save against a Plague that has a red puke up, at least not unless you're planning on trading with a person on hook. because of being able to reduce everybody's health state, and because of how good a red peak is. If you can force those things to happen, or you can increase like the effectiveness of those powers, like if you're using like the iridescent add-on, I believe it's like Eerie Seal, which she gets at every generator. It's very, very decent. If you use the iridescent Black Incense, where you can see people whenever they puke, very, very good tracking. One of the best tracking things in the game. I would say is actually probably a little bit better than Demo's tracking, which I was talking about earlier. Because every time somebody pukes, you can see their aura for a few seconds, and people puke every few seconds, so you pretty much see them all the time. Her cooldown add-ons, very slept on. I've had a lot of times in the past where I am chasing somebody in a loop, and because of the cooldown add-ons, I am able to get a hit on them when I otherwise would not be able to. Because if you don't know, the cooldown add-ons, when she pukes on somebody, it's a little bit of a cooldown to where she goes a little bit slower and she can't puke again for like a couple seconds. But if you're in double cooldown, she essentially has no cooldown. She just puke on somebody and then immediately puke on somebody again, keep on charging it up, and keep on puking and puking and puking, and eventually they just can't even make it back to tile, even with like perks like Dead Hard. And because of how kitted out some of her add-ons are, because of how her ability can be very powerful, I think she has a place in B tier, especially if you're running things like Blood Echo Mindbreaker. Those can completely negate exhaustion perks as soon as everybody is infected, and that just completely destroys exhaustion perks. And really the only counter to her running Blood Echo Mindbreaker is to cleanse more, and if she cleanses more, then she's going to have her power more, and she's going to be more effective in chase, and it's really like damned if you do, damned if you don't. And so because of how effective she can be, that's the reason why I'm putting her in B tier. But of course, if people separate, it's like with Oni, if people separate, then she's not nearly as effective. If people like hyper cleanse and make it to where she's forced to get her ability, while that can benefit her, it also hurts her by not being able to have her ability nearly as much. And yeah, just bigger maps. She doesn't have any form of map ability, and because of that, no form of map ability, really makes it to where she can struggle on some maps. Some maps she can be very effective on if they're a bit smaller or medium in size, but if the bigger the map, she really doesn't do that well with. But I think that she's a lot more effective of a killer than people believe, and I think if people actually started playing her more, they would realize it, especially with how strong some of her add-ons are and how strong some of the builds are. So yeah, these pretty much these 3 tiers, S, A, and B, are all killers that I think can perform either really good or at least decently in MMR. Every killer beyond this, I feel like is going to heavily struggle. I feel like C tier is going to heavily struggle, maybe possibly like having good decent matches, but like against good people, it's going to be really difficult. D, you're going to be losing the majority of your matches. E tier, like what are you doing? All right, so C tier. I feel like at the top of C tier, I'm going to put the Twins. The Twins can be very effective at camping, can be very effective at spreading pressure across the entire map. So like they don't really, they still don't have a form of mobility in terms of like applying like Pop Goes the Weasel, but they can still pressure gens with perks like Ruin by sending Victor out across the map and hitting somebody. But because they need to either send out Victor again in order to end the chase and waste that time doing that, and then even if they do end the chase across the map, they got to bring Charlotte all the way across the map to where Victor down somebody. And because of all that travel time, because of all the travel time of having to go across the map in order to get somebody, and because people can throw down pallets early in order to negate Victor and make him have to run around the pallet, or they can run around objects and waste a lot of time with Victor having to like try to position himself in a certain way so that they can't negate his power. Because of how much time sink the Twins requires, I don't think that they're nearly as effective. They can be very, very good at camping. They can make it where it's very hard to get saves, but with the addition of the borrowed time change to where borrowed time applies regardless of terror radius, now that the person can get borrowed time even if Victor is camping, it makes it to where they're a lot less effective at hook, and it makes it to where they're still good killer. They can still be very oppressive, but because of the time sink, I can't see them doing consistently well. I think that you can probably play them in a way that does yield better results, but for like going against a majority of good teams, I think you're going to struggle quite a bit. But I still think that she's very effective. She's very effective at what she does, and that's why I'm putting her at the highest into C tier. And then the next killer that I would say is probably going to be Huntress. Huntress is very, very strong most of the time. She has 5 hatchets at default. She can get up to 8 with add-ons. A lot of her add-ons are very good, especially with the add-on pass that they did. Flight speed add-ons are very good. The ones that increase your pulling up speed, Babushka, very good. The Glowing Concoction is very good for tracking people behind walls. A lot of very good add-ons. But the main problem with Huntress is that she's slow. She's 4.2 meters per second. Normal killers are 4.4, I believe. And because of how slow she is, she really can't be effective at some loops. And if somebody runs early, that hurts her more than any other killer. Of course, running early hurts the majority of killers, but a majority of these killers that I have in the upper tiers, they have some way of like closing the gap, especially the ones in S and A tier. But Huntress, because of her slowness, it can make it to where you can just don't get the shot. Like you just don't have enough distance in order to get line of sight, and your power becomes a lot less effective, especially with the bigger the map is. And because of that hindrance of the bigger maps, and because people can use your speed to your disadvantage, even though she's very, very strong and chases at a lot of loops and very strong if she can land her shots, it still makes her to where she's not nearly as effective as the other killers. And I do put her still in the C tier because I do believe that you can play her in a certain way that you can yield decent results, but you're going to be losing majority of your matches if you're going against good people. Now, besides that, I would put also very, very slow killer, Deathslinger. I say Deathslinger is just below Huntress. Deathslinger suffers from the same thing Huntress does, very slow. The thing that Deathslinger does have going for him is that he has a small tear radius. He can stop on monitor abuse and be just a stealth killer pretty much. But him being a stealth killer doesn't really matter as much, especially if you're going against people that are playing in comms. It's one of the instances where comms actually does matter, because if you have somebody that is in comms, or even somebody with Kindred, and they say like, oh, the Deathslinger is going towards you, they can run early and they can really negate any benefit the Deathslinger could have from having a reduced tear radius. And so because he's so slow, and because especially his power is limited range, unlike Huntress's, I would put him below Huntress. He can still be very effective at loops. He can make it to where just loops are just unloopable because of how quickly he can ADS and how quickly he can shoot a shot. But if he misses the shot, it's a lot more impactful and a lot more of a hindrance to him than it is for Huntress. And because of that, putting him where he is on the listing. So, very effective in chase, can be very good at getting downs very, very quickly, but because of his lack of mobility, because of his slowness, is not even his lack of mobility, because of how slow he is, he's just not as good as other killers. Slowdown perks, of course, are decent with them, but not nearly as effective as other killers in the tier list that are higher. All right, and now we have Nemesis. I put Nemesis here. Now, the reason why I'm putting Nemesis here is because Nemesis is a bit of a funny killer. He gets free pressure from his zombies, but his zombies are very hit or miss. Sometimes you have a zombie that's in the corner of the map that's running into a wall that's doing nothing. Sometimes you have zombies that are face camping survivors on hook, pressuring the hook and making it harder to get saves. Sometimes you have zombies that are going to gens and making it to where you get more ruin value, or just making it to where they can't do the gens as easily. Sometimes your zombies are very good, very bad, or they're just kind of meh. Most of the time, they're just kind of meh, in my opinion, from what I've seen. And because they can be countered so easily by flashlights, zombies they're just very meh in all fairness. Can't be very good. Most of the time, they're kind of meh or bad. But besides that, his tentacle ability, it takes a long time to charge up. There are some instances where you can get your power very quickly if people are grouping up. But if people are playing well, they're going to be using the zombies in order to get free speed boosts away from tiles. I do this a lot when I'm playing against Nemesis, where when I see a zombie near my tile, and I know the Nemesis player is about to get me, I'll purposely get hit by a zombie because I get a free speed boost, and I'll just go to the next tile. And then if he does hit me with his tentacle, he doesn't get nearly as much power meter out of it, and it's just a net gain for me. It's a good thing to do, is to use the zombies for speed to get away from tiles. And so because he can help out the survivors in that way, especially with zombies, and because he has to charge up his ability by hitting people with the tentacle ability, which can be dodged, it's definitely dodgeable, he's a bit less effective. It takes him a long time in order to get his full extent of his power. However, because he can, when he's in his tier 2, he can break pallets. essentially making him a M2 to mind game killer, where he can just pull up. If you throw it in the pallet, you get hit, or if you throw it in the pallet, even if he misses, he breaks the pallet immediately. It doesn't really matter. You're kind of forcing you to get the stun or try to like mind game it and greet it and get another loop. Or unless you have a lot of distance, you can just throw it down early and just choose through it anyways. And then in his tier 3 ability, he is now, in addition to having extra range on his tentacle, he can actually go 4.meters per second, which is as fast as a survivor's run. And so he can be very effective at windows and at shorter loops. But because it can take so long to get to that power, and because his zombies are a bit meh, and because he lacks map ability, so where I'm putting him where he is, he can be very strong, but because of those factors, it could lead to you not winning nearly as much matches as you would hope. All right. And then now the next killer that I have up is the Trickster. Now I know this is going to be a bit controversial as well, because I'm going to put some other killers below Trickster that people do not think are below Trickster. The reason why I put Trickster here, because Trickster suffers from the same thing that Huntress and Deathslinger suffer from. He's slow. He's slower than an average killer. He's 4.2. And he also doesn't have as many knives as he used to have. However, he doesn't need as many knives to hit in order to down somebody. But because of his slowness, he's not nearly as effective as some of the other killers. But because that they reduce the amount of knives it takes in order to down, it makes it to where he's going to down you. A decent Trickster is going to be able to down you no matter what. Even a bad Trickster is going to be able to down you no matter what. It's just the time it takes to down is going to be a little bit different. But no matter what, you're going to die, even if you play perfectly. But a good Trickster is going to be able to down you very, very effectively. And when they down you, it's very similar to Hag, to where if a Trickster downs you and they play defensively, you're not getting off hook. And even if you get off hook, there's going to be a lot of damage dealt in order to get you off that hook. Because of the way his power works, he can do incremental damage to anybody approaching the hook, that by the time that they get close to the hook, he can proc that damage over and be able to get them injured. And then while they're saving, in the act of them going through the animation of saving, they can get all the knives thrown in their back and they're just down on the ground. And that makes it where the Trickster now is a slug immediately. And as soon as your feet touch the ground, then he's already throwing knives into you. Chew through your bar time, and then chew through that health state, and then you're just on the ground as well. Now he has 2 slugs. So if you play Trickster defensively, and especially if you get your ultimate ability when somebody's saving on the hook, he can make it to where people just drop like flies. If he can make people forced to be by each other, he can be very effective, and he can win games in an instant. And so because of that specific interaction, I think that justifies his placement in C tier. Of course, he's slower, doesn't benefit nearly as much from slowdown perks. He doesn't, of course, he still benefits from them, but he can't capitalize them on nearly as much. But because of how well he can play defensively, and because he's going to be able to down you no matter what, that's where I'm putting him in the C tier. You're still going to lose majority of your matches, but I still think that he has a place in a play style to where you can be very, very dirty with them and still get a consistent amount of kills. Now we're going to be going down into the D tier. The D tier is the killers that I believe are better than the worst. Just to say it simply, they're better than the worst killers. But I think that against a decent team can either negate their power enough, or the power just isn't nearly as effective as it needs to be in order to justify, or in order to like hold its own against decent people. And so the killer that I'm going to put at the top of D tier, and of course I could be misinformed because this killer did just come out a few weeks ago, Pinhead. I'm putting Pinhead at the top of D tier. The Pinhead buffs, the things that are good for him, his passive ability that constantly resets is very good at pressuring the generators. He can slow down people that are in the middle of loops. He really shines in the middle of loops of being able to snare somebody, especially if you can get the snare placements right. He can snare somebody and make it to where they just can't get to the window or can't get to the pallet. Or they have to waste the pallets a little bit more fast than they would like to. And so he can be decently effective in chase. It's just he requires such a big time commitment in order to become good with. But if you can get to a decent place with him, I think he can be very effective. He is really good at add-ons. not all of his add-ons are good, but he has some decent add-ons. The iridescent one that makes it where you can't see the box until it's already activated unless you're within 60 meters, essentially a knockout for the box. That's one of his strongest add-ons. He can be very oppressive, especially on some maps. The one that spawns chains faster if they break on the environment. It just like respawns a chain in place of one that's broken on the environment. Very effective. The ones that take longer to solve the box, also very effective. Can make it where you can get your box a lot more often. And if you're running perks like Franklin's Demise, so you can get the box out of somebody's hands that is holding it, even without having to down them. Hoarder can be very effective if you're running Lethal Pursuer, or if you just running like Barbecue, any information perk to where you can see where survivors are. You can kind of guess where the box placement is going to be, because I don't know how many people know this. It's something that a few killers have found out, especially a few consecrators, I believe, that the box will always spawn in the place where the survivors and killer aren't. So as killer, if you know where the survivors are, you just go to the one place in the map to where nobody is, and then it's probably going to be there. Assuming that it's already spawned, you can hear the spawn indicator whenever it sounds off in the match. And so you can pretty consistently find the box, especially with Lethal Pursuit at the beginning of games, get a lot of pressure very early on. Now, those are all good. However, the box can be very easily counterable. Unless you're running the add-on to where people can't see the box, unless they're within 16 meters, they can just constantly deny your passive ability, or your passive ability does nothing. Of course, that is slowing down the game a little bit, because that's always one person that's not doing gens, at least not as efficiently, and they're always having to go and pick up the box. His snare ability is high risk, very low reward. It's not particularly effective a lot of the time, in my opinion. At least not as much as other killers' abilities. And because it breaks on the environment, and because he breaks his own chains as well, it makes him. He can still be decent. He can still be fun to play, but he's not nearly as effective as other killers. And because of even just missing one shot, it's like 10 times of like the feel bad and like detriment of missing a Deathslinger shot. Because not only are you not close to them, or not as close as you'd be with like Deathslinger, but you still have that cooldown animation to where you can't use your power, and you go a little bit slower as well, and you got to catch back up, you got to walk up to them again, and during that time they can just run away from the tile and gain more distance. And it's such a big risk for such a low reward. If a pinhead can hit all of his shots super consistently, I can see them being more effective, but even then, I don't feel like they justify any other placement besides the top of D tier. I feel like pinheads are going to lose the majority of their games against really good people, even with really good builds. And because in order to make his power even better, you got to run Franklin's into Hoarder and stuff like that. It makes it to where there's a lot of like stuff that you have to run that otherwise you'd be running slowdown perks. You got to run in order to make his power more effective, and other killers don't have that. All right, so the next killer that I'm going to put, this killer that's kind of similar to Pinhead in all actuality, is Doctor. Now, Doctor, I feel like is a little bit more effective at doing what Pinhead does than Pinhead, because Doctor can deny people from vaulting, and it can deny people from throwing in pallets just default. They just can't even do it. A lot of his add-ons are very good. He has built-in tracking with his add-ons. It can be a lot more consistent. But the one thing that I think that Pinhead has over Doctor, because Doctor doesn't have any mobility, neither does Pinhead. Actually, Pinhead does have mobility with being able to teleport. But that's not up to you. But the one thing I think that Pinhead is over Doctor is getting that one person off the gen super consistently. Because if they don't get off the gen consistently, then they're going to be struggling, and it's going to interrupt all actions if the passive hunt does start. And so because of that chance of having that passive ability proc and getting that much of pressure, I feel like he has a slight edge above Doctor. But again, this is one of those killers that you can justify like Doctor being a little bit more powerful than Pinhead. You can interchangeably put these two. But because he can deny people, because of his add-ons being so good, he has built-in tracking add-on. He has add-ons that increases terrorists, makes his power more effective. He has add-ons that can shock forward and cover more ground with his shock. He even has Iridescent King, which makes it to where it's like all the folder add-ons in one. A lot of his add-ons are very good, and he's very good at tracking, and he's pretty decent at ending chases. But at the end of the day, no mobility, M1 killer. If somebody knows how Doctor's ability works, they're going to play a lot more defensively, a lot more safe, and he's going to have to chew through pallets like everybody else, and he can't break pallets faster at default. He doesn't have any ability to break through pallets faster. He still has to go through the default breaking animation, and because of that noble ability, having to chew through pallets, having to M1 twice in order to get downs, he's not nearly as effective as other killers, and probably going to be losing a majority of your matches. You still can play him in a way that you probably at least have okay results, but I don't think against the highest tier players, against the highest MMR, I don't think he's nearly as effective. And again, this is just my opinion. Next killer I have up is Ghostface. Ghostface, I feel like, is one of the best stealth killers. Yeah, I would say he's one of the best. I don't think he's nearly as good as Wraith. He's very good at proccing his power across multiple people. He can get like multiple people 99, and because of that, he can really shorten his chases if he manages to sneak up on people. But the big detriment to his power is that it's so easy to pull him out of his power, and he has no mobility otherwise. In order for his power to be extremely effective, you got to run the double recovery. Otherwise, people will just pulling you out of your power, especially with how janky his power reveal can be. Sometimes people can reveal you from when they're behind walls because of how janky the power reveal can be and how it can rob you of your power, and you needing to run those add-ons to recover the power much faster because of the noble ability. And because he has to choose their pallets like any other killer, even if you get that instant down ability on somebody and you can close the gap, or you can try to close the gap and try to down them, they can still throw down pallets really fast and make it where you just don't even get that down. So because he is decent at stealth and he can get that instant down ability, I'm putting him where he is. However, because he doesn't have any mobility, has to M1 twice, even if he has the M2 ability to down people, he still has to deal with the pallets just the same as everybody else. I'm putting him where he is. Probably going to struggle a lot with this killer. Now, Myers, essentially he's just a worse Ghostface. His power is limited. He's one of the few killers that just has a limitation to his power, where he can run out of his power. He just doesn't have his power anymore. There's really no other killer that I believe can run out of their power. Of course, like Huntress has to reload, but she has an infinite amount of hatchets and lockers. No, not really. There's really no killer. I guess Pig. Yeah, I guess Pig. She runs out of her power, runs out of her hats. But she still has the dash ability. When Myers runs out of his stalking ability, then he doesn't have anything. And so Myers, he has to stalk people in order to get his tier 2 and tier 3. He has that detriment at the beginning of the game to where he's much slower than every other killer. And he really, the main determining factor of how well you're going to do in a Myers match is how quickly you can get out of your tier 1 ability and into your tier 2. Of course, add-ons help out with getting out of your power, getting out of your tier 1 faster. But it's still a huge detriment. Like he's very outdated killer design. Him being able to vault pallets, or not vault pallets, vault windows faster while he's in this tier 2, and even faster when he's in this tier 3. Very helpful. I feel like it's even better when you're running a perk like Bamboozle, because you can just basically dive through windows. He has decent snowball potential of being able to down multiple people, but he still has to close the gap. He still moves at normal movement speed, 4.4, even when he's in his instant ability. And so if people separate a lot, it makes it where his power is not nearly as effective, because his power is a burst power. It goes on, or not goes on cooldown, but he only has it for a limited amount of time. And unlike with Oni, where Oni can close the gap much faster because he can run, this killer can't dash towards people. And so if people will just spread out, and especially like they deny him his stalking ability by hiding behind objects, can really reduce his effectiveness, and the gens are going to get done most likely against this killer to where he's just not nearly as effective. And unlike with Ghostface, Ghostface can stalk multiple people and choose when he wants to activate the instant on multiple people and still have it like pocketed on other people. He can't do that, to where if he gets his power off and then he only gets one person when he has the potential to get all four, it's powerful, but it's not nearly as powerful and as effective as Ghostface's power in the way that it works, in my opinion. All right, and the last killer that I'm going to put here on D tier is Pig. Pig, I feel like her dash ability can be okay at some tiles, but it's really only okay if you're running combat traps. If you're not running combat traps, I don't feel like her power is effective at really any tile against a decent player. Her hats, I feel like, are very underrated, especially with certain add-ons. Her hats can be super oppressive. Worst case, they make it where survivor's not doing a gen for even like a minimum of 30 seconds. Best case, the survivor dies. Uh, and especially if you stack slowdown perks on that, if you manage to get a couple hats out and you stack slowdown perks, you can make it where the game just goes to a crawl. Of course, after they get through the hats, then the game will speed up again. But if you can manage to put those survivors in a really bad position during that hat time, then I feel like you can have some decent matches. But because of the RNG element of her hats being able to get the hats off immediately, and I've had that happen multiple games to where people just get them off on their first box every single time. She's not nearly as effective as other killers. Doesn't have any form of mobility. Her anti-loop ability, or doesn't have any form of map mobility. Her anti-loop mobility, I can't talk. Her anti-loop ability is meh at best. Needs an add-on in order to be more effective. I feel like she's justified in placement at the bottom of D tier. RNG power really doesn't have anything to help her out in chase very much, and no map mobility, so that's where. But I feel like because of her hats, you can have decent matches with her. It's just you're gonna struggle a lot depending on how you play. All right, now in the E tier, E stands for everyone but these killers, the ones that you should play. These killers, of course, you can have fun playing them, but these killers I feel like are just not effective. They're just not good enough to justify playing them in high MMR. These are killers that you will lose 90% of your matches, and you are going to have a really rough time. The 10% of the matches that you do manage to get, it's probably due to like how you're playing, or because people are just throwing. They just don't want to go against you. Top of this, I'm going to say Trapper is the most effective in the E tier. Trapper's add-ons are super deadly. Bloody Coil and Iridescent Stone, very, very good. They completely can change how the Trapper's power works. In addition to that, the bags can be very effective. Setting tools can be decent. But because of how strong some of his add-ons can be, and because of how well he can lock down certain areas, if he gets somebody in basement Trapper, what are you going to do? He sets down a trap in front of every doorway, in front of every window, and then he gets notified when you go in. He runs over, sets the trap again, and then goes back down, hits you. You go back up. You have to step in a trap now in order to get out. And then you just can't even get out. And so because he has decent potential of locking down, and he has decent potential of like stopping chases, have decent anti-loop if he sets up properly, putting him at the top of E tier, he can be countered by people disarming his traps constantly. Of course, if he's running Eerie Stone, he can negate that entirely. Or if he's setting pretty savvy traps, negate that quite a bit. But I'm putting him at the top of E tier. No map mobility. He has a set of his power, so wastes a lot of time. Really not worth playing at high MMR just because of the time sink invested with his power. For sometimes no reward. Sometimes you get no traps in a game. Sometimes you get a ton of traps in the game. It's very feast or famine with this killer. Next killer I'm going to put is Clown. Clown is an anti-loop killer as well. He slows down people, but the really big counter to Clown is just throwing down pallets early. If you throw down a pallet early, he has to break it, and you just keep on making distance, and he has to keep on throwing bottles, and he doesn't have infinite bottles, and so he has to reload. And so if you manage to make him miss enough shots, or make him think that you're running a certain direction, but you run somewhere else, and he has to waste more bottles, then he has to put a pretty significant amount of time into being an anti-loop killer. His anti-loop ability is not nearly as effective as other killers' anti-loops, especially because he has to reload it. And so because of that, in combination with no map ability, makes it to where gens are going to fly when people are playing against him, and people are just going to throw down pallets early, and he really doesn't have any means to stop that besides slowing them down. But even if he slows them down, it really doesn't mean much, especially if they have like Dead Hard. They can Dead Hard a little bit in the gas. They can't get as far when they're intoxicated, but they can still make up a little bit of distance, be able to get to the pallet, and make it to where he just really can't do anything about it. And then Legion. Legion, I feel like, is one of the most perk dependent, add-on dependent, and map dependent killers in the game, and player dependent. Not only the player that's playing them, but also the player who they're playing against. If any of those factors are not in Legion's favor, Legion struggles a lot. If doesn't have the right map, if it's too big, not going to be able to get his power off as effectively. If people aren't grouping up, then he's not going to be able to get his power off effectively. He's essentially just getting one hit. He's essentially just a worse Wraith. You can get that first hit, but he just can't get that second hit because he has nothing to help him in chase. He's very add-on dependent, or if you're not running duration add-ons, then you're really never going to get a chain hit, no matter if it's a small map or not. He is very perk dependent, where if you're not running the right set of perks, even if you are running the right set of perks, then you can stop really rough matches. You can run like the Blood Echo Mindbreaker that you could run on Plague, but it's not going to be nearly as effective on Legion because Legion can't consistently get people injured as much as Plague can. And so, because of how dependent he is on so many factors, and because his ability is really just getting people injured and nothing else, no way to down people, I think that he's the worst killer in the game, especially at high MMR. I feel like he struggles the most. You're going to lose the most amount of matches with him. It's going to be very hard pressed to be doing very well, even with really strong builds. Even if you're running the Ruin and Dying, Tinker, or Pop, even if you're running that build, you're still going to struggle a lot with them. He may slow down games enough to where it's kind of like a Freddy situation where they can maybe have enough attrition just drawing out the match where they get enough pallets out of the way where they can do decently. But even then, people probably aren't going to heal because it's a Legion. They're just going to separate and their gen's going to get done. And the most the Legion can get is maybe like a 1k, maybe a 2k. And that's like doing the best possible case scenario. And so that is the reason why I'm putting Legion the bottom of this tier list. It's the worst killer at high MMR. And so, yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Me rambling for an hour about how effective each killer is and where I would place them on a tier list. If you guys agree with me, I would love to know. I would love to hear you guys' reasoning for like why you would put a certain killer here or there, or the reasons why I am dumb and I don't know anything about the game. If you guys want to say anything like that, put it in the comments down below, and I'd love to hear your opinions. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.